Chapter 292. Saved. In the face of all of the ubiquitous pavilion cultivators charging toward her, Bai Suyuan made a hand seal with one hand while slashing her sword upward, and countless silver threads instantly shot out of the tip of her sword before flying in all directions. The space in the wake of the silver threads twisted and blurred, and 3 body integration cultivators instantly had their bodies completely dismembered, having been caught off guard by the attack. A string of sharp clangs rang out as all of the surrounding ubiquitous pavilion cultivators hurriedly adopted defensive measures to keep the silver threads at bay, not daring to get any closer. Right at this moment, a streak of black light flew through the air overhead, following which a figure wielding an inky black spear was revealed. The figure was giving off the aura of a Grand Ascension cultivator, and he was swooping down toward Bai Suyuan like lightning. Bai Suyuan's reactions were quite sharp, and she immediately pierced her sword directly upward to strike the tip of the oncoming spear. However, to her surprise, the black spear abruptly melted into a liquid form, then flowed down the silver longsword toward her arm. At the same time, her silver longsword was fizzling incessantly as if it were being severely corroded, and plumes of white smoke were rising up amid erratic flashes of spiritual light. Bai Suyuan was quite startled by this, and she hurriedly tried to shake the black liquid off her sword, but the liquid was unexpectedly sticky and continued to flow toward the hilt of the sword, despite her best efforts to keep it at bay. In this dire situation, she decisively tossed the longsword aside, then retreated back to over 1,000 feet away. However, right at this moment, a burst of yellow light erupted out of the ground, then transformed into a thick vine that was enveloped in azure light, before attempting to wind itself around her legs and her waist. The white veil garment that she was wearing instantly began to glow with dazzling white light, conjuring up a light barrier to keep the vine at bay. Meanwhile, Bai Suyuan summoned a white handkerchief with a flick of her wrist before waving it at the azure vine. There was a crescent-shaped moon embroidered onto the white handkerchief, around which were a series of cloud-like spirit patterns that were rippling with moonlight. As she swept the handkerchief through the air, the spirit patterns on the handkerchief began to glow brightly, releasing faint moonlight that surged along the azure vine to ensnare it tightly. Immediately thereafter, the light on the handkerchief flashed at Bai Suyuan's behest, and the entire azure vine was instantly turned to stone before being reduced to dust by a gentle sweep of her hand. The Grand Ascension cultivator that was charging toward her stopped in his tracks upon seeing this, seemingly a little wary of Bai Suyuan's treasures. The greed in the eyes of the other ubiquitous pavilion cultivators became even more pronounced at the sight of her formidable treasures, but many of them had moved back to open up some distance between her and themselves. They could see that she still had many trump cards up her sleeve, so it definitely wasn't a good idea to rush in head-on. Hence, everyone was waiting for her to be worn down before they swooped in for the kill. Bai Suyuan swept her gaze across her surroundings, and her heart immediately sank. The situation was far from encouraging. Most of the Holy Puppet Sect's elders and disciples were either dead or severely wounded, and at this rate, they weren't going to be able to hold off the enemy for much longer. A grim look appeared in her eyes upon seeing this, and she injected a wisp of magic power into the talisman that was adhered to her wrist. The talisman immediately began to release golden light that enveloped her entire body, and she abruptly vanished from the spot. However, almost at the exact same moment, the space nearby shuddered, and a golden light barrier appeared. A humanoid figure crashed into the light barrier before falling to the ground, revealing itself to be none other than Bai Suyuan. After falling to the ground, she immediately scrambled to her feet, then swept a hand through the air to send the white handkerchief revolving around her. There was an alarmed look in her eyes, and she hurriedly looked around to find that all of the ubiquitous pavilion cultivators were also looking very surprised, as if no one had any idea when this light barrier had been set up. Right at this moment, a one-eyed elderly man with gray scales all over his face emerged from the back of the crowd. He was wearing a black cloak, and he cackled in a raspy voice. "This girl is mine, so I suggest all of you get back if you know what's good for you." Everyone immediately turned to discover that the old man was a true immortal cultivator, so all of them had no choice but to do as they were told. The most powerful, ubiquitous pavilion cultivators present aside from the old man were only at the Grand Ascension stage, so no one dared to oppose him. You certainly don't see someone with the Moonlight Immortal physique every day. I have a dual cultivation method that suits your constitution very well. The old man chuckled as he stroked his own chin while sizing up Bai Suyuan with a lustful look in his eyes. Bai Suyuan couldn't help but shudder as a hint of disgust welled up in her heart, and she unconsciously tightened her grasp on the white handkerchief in her hand. The old man licked his lips at the sight of this subtle gesture of hers, and he chuckled. "Resist all you want. It won't be any fun if you give up right away." As soon as his voice trailed off, a gray talisman flew out of his sleeve with a flick of his wrist before adhering itself to Bai Suyuan's forehead in the blink of an eye. The talisman was moving far too quickly for her to react, and her entire body was completely immobilized, while her magic power circulation also stagnated. The one-eyed old man reached out toward Bai Suyuan with a sinister smile. Even if he didn't reap any other spoils from this trip, Bai Suyuan alone would have already been an extremely prized acquisition. Right as his hand was about to come into contact with Bai Suyuan's clothes, a loud thunderclap suddenly rang out in the sky, following which a burst of golden light plummeted out of the heavens before transforming into a shimmering golden flying sword. A loud thump rang out as the flying sword pierced through the golden light barrier with ease, and the light barrier wasn't even able to slow it down in the slightest. The old man was very alarmed by this, and he hurriedly darted back several thousand feet before coming to a stop, sending around a dozen ubiquitous pavilion cultivators and azure-armored Dao warriors toppling to the side as he did so. A sharp clang rang out as the golden longsword pierced into the ground, unleashing powerful shockwaves that sent Bai Suyuan and all of the cultivators and puppets around her flying back through the air. Immediately thereafter, two streaks of light descended in front of her out of the sky, revealing themselves to have been none other than Han Li's duo. The one-eyed old man could see that Han Li and Qilin 9 were both true immortals who weren't any less powerful than him, and he immediately fled the scene, not daring to linger any longer. What a coward. Qilin 9 harumphed coldly as he picked up his 9-star golden sword and cast his gaze toward the fleeing old man, but displayed no intention of going after him. Yun Ni was still locked in battle against Lu Ji in the sky, and despite the intensity of her battle, she had made sure to keep an eye on the main island this entire time. As soon as she noticed that Bai Suyuan was being targeted, she immediately used a secret technique to transmit a message to Qilin 9, imploring him to protect Qilin 11. Qilin 9 and Han Li had only just arrived on the main island at the time, and upon receiving this message from Yun Ni, he immediately realized who Qilin 11 was, and thus he had hurried onto the plaza with Han Li to save her. Han Li took a glance at the immobilized Bai Suyuan, and even though he had already guessed that Qilin 3 was most likely none other than Yun Ni, he was still left feeling a little perplexed about why Bai Suyuan had come on this mission when she was only at the Grand Ascension stage. He raised a hand and gently wiped it over Bai Suyuan's forehead, releasing a burst of azure light that removed the gray talisman with ease. Bai Suyuan shuddered and stumbled slightly before steadying herself. Having been freed from the talisman's restraints, she immediately approached Han Li's duo, then cupped her fist toward them in a salute as she said, "Thank you, fellow Taoists." Han Li and Qilin 9 merely nodded in response without saying anything. The surrounding ubiquitous pavilion cultivators naturally didn't dare to attack them, but the azure-armored Dao warriors had no such inhibitions, and after eradicating the nearby Holy Puppet Sect cultivators, they immediately converged toward Han Li's duo. In the blink of an eye, Han Li was surrounded by over 100 azure-armored Dao warriors, all of which lashed out at him with their weapons. A layer of golden scales appeared over Han Li's fists as he spun rapidly on the spot like a spinning top, while simultaneously throwing punches in all directions to unleash a vast array of golden fist projections. None of the azure-armored Dao warriors were able to withstand more than a single blow, exploding into pieces as soon as they came into contact with any of the golden fist projections. The pieces of the destroyed azure-armored Dao warriors erupted through the air like shrapnel, punching large holes into the bodies of the Dao warriors that were still yet to be eradicated. At a rough visual estimate, Hanli determined that the physical constitution of these azure-armored Dao warriors was roughly on par with that of the golden Dao warriors that he had fought against in the past, but these ones were faster and more agile. At the same time, these Dao warriors also seemed to have possessed stronger vitality, able to continue attacking without slowing down in the slightest, even if their bodies had already been severely ravaged. While Hanli continued to destroy more of the oncoming Dao warriors, he was looking around with a hint of disappointment in his eyes. These Dao warriors were just ordinary specimens, and there weren't any primary beings among them. Otherwise, he would have had another primary being to plant. Around 2 hours later, not only had the number of people on the plaza not decreased, it was only increasing further and further, with streaks of light rapidly converging from all directions. The Holy Puppet sect was in a dire situation, and all of its remaining forces were converging toward the plaza on the main island.